Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a word you hear everywhere, one of the most divisive words in politics, woke. The source material we're breaking down today makes a fascinating case for how this word was intentionally flipped from a call for awareness into a political weapon. Let's get into it.
So let's just ask it, what does woke even mean anymore? I mean, if you feel like it's just this confusing catch-all insult that gets thrown around, you are definitely not alone. And according to the analysis we're exploring today, that confusion, well, it isn't an accident. It's actually a deliberate political strategy.
Okay, so to really understand how this word was turned into a weapon, the source material says we have to go back. We have to understand what it originally meant, long before it was ever shouted on cable news. So, where did it even come from? The analysis here says the original meaning of woke wasn't really a political ideology, it was more of a survival skill. In its original context, being woke meant being alert to injustices, the kind of things that power structures might want to keep hidden. It was, pretty simply, a call to see the world clearly. This source traces this idea as a kind of slow burn within Black communities for almost 100 years, but then you get to 2014. That was the flashpoint. During the Ferguson protests, Stay Woke just exploded into the national consciousness as this powerful rallying cry against police brutality. And this brings us to the absolute core argument of this analysis, that this term of empowerment wasn't just, misunderstood over time, it was deliberately inverted. A concept that started out as a shield was strategically reforged into a sword. And here's that flip in a nutshell. On the left, you have the original intent described by the source, a call for awareness. And on the right, you have what it often does now, function as this vague, all-purpose insult designed to create outrage against progressive ideas. So how in the world did that happen? Well, the analysis points to this specific two-step tactic it calls semantic bleaching and reloading. The idea is, first, you bleach the word. You strip it of all its history, its context. And then, once it's an empty shell, you reload it with all new, negative, and pretty fearful associations. The source offers this quote from conservative activist Christopher Rufo as a direct example of this playbook. Now, he was talking about critical race theory here, but the analysis claims that the exact same strategy was applied to woke. You take a term, you make it toxic by linking it to all sorts of unrelated cultural insanities, and boom, you've turned it into a weapon. But why does this work so well? Why is this re-engineered word such an effective political tool? The source material actually breaks down the mechanics of what makes it, and this is their phrase, a perfect villain. According to the source, this is where its real power lies. The key is that it's vague on purpose. It can mean whatever the user wants it to mean, which makes it the perfect catch-all scapegoat. You don't need a complex argument. It's just a shortcut that goes straight for our emotional triggers. A really crucial point from the analysis is how it bundles different grievances together. The term basically acts like a container, fusing all these separate anxieties about race, gender, schools, elites. It takes all these different fears and melts them down into one single emotionally charged target. The analysis also highlights one particular narrative as maybe the most powerful emotional lever of them all, protecting children. By framing debates over things like books in a library or school curriculums as a moral emergency, the anti-woke campaign is able to tap into a really powerful and universal human instinct. Now, the analysis is very clear that this isn't just a war of words, it's not just about arguments online. This rhetoric is being translated into tangible, real-world consequences that are reshaping our laws and our public institutions. And you can see some concrete examples right here. In education, you have actual laws like Florida's Stop Woke Act. In federal policy, something called the Project 2025 Blueprint proposes to literally scrub terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion from federal rules. This rhetoric is also used to justify policies that affect LGBTQ+ rights and even to criticize diversity programs in the military. And the scale of this legislative push is pretty significant. We're not just talking about one or two isolated bills. According to the data cited in the source, in a single year, 65 separate bills were introduced across the country specifically going after diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And behind all the legislation, there is some serious money. The source reports a frankly staggering figure. In 2024 alone, $215 million was spent on TV ads that vilify transgender people, often using this exact anti-woke framing to make their case.
So, does all this messaging actually work? The source argues that yes, it has a measurable effect. It points to data showing an 18-point drop among Gen Z, that's the youngest generation of adults, in their agreement that traditional gender roles are outdated. This is presented as hard evidence that this messaging can shift perceptions, even among younger, typically more progressive generations.
Right, so if that's the diagnosis of the problem, what's the proposed solution? The final section of the analysis lays out a whole set of counter strategies that are designed to, in its words, break the spell of this anti-woke narrative.
Now, what's really interesting is that the proposed solution isn't to try and defend the word woke. Instead, the first step is to expose the tactic itself, to pull back the curtain and explain the game that's being played. The analysis also suggests matching the emotion of fear with a positive emotional alternative, reclaiming core values like freedom and family, and proactively inoculating the public against these kinds of manipulation tactics.
And this slide really gets to the heart of the recommendation: change the frame entirely. The analysis suggests completely abandoning the woke extremism frame and shifting the whole debate. The proposed news story is one of freedom for all versus control for some, an appeal to a foundational value that, it argues, resonates much more broadly. And so ultimately, the analysis leaves us with this question: is this whole battle really about a single four-letter word? Or is the fight over our language just a proxy for a much larger struggle? A struggle over who gets to participate in society, what parts of our history can be taught, and what the rules of democracy are actually going to be for the next generation.